Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason Del Rosa, and you're listening to the latest edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. We have hit the final week of the football season. Like it or not, there is nothing beyond this weekend because we have hit the week of all these state championships, 1A all the way up to 6A. We still have one team alive. It is not surprising who that one team is. We will talk about how they got to the championship game, and we will give a preview of the Gunter Tigers in the 3A Division II state championship game coming up later this week. And then we will also get into some realignment talk because since we last convened on the podcast, the UIL came out with the cutoffs for the upcoming realignment. So we do know a couple pieces of information. I won't go too in depth. I think I'll save most of that for a preview / recap of what things look like when we get closer. But we did find out some interesting tidbits, and I know everybody loves to talk about realignment and what that can bring. So we will discuss that in the latter half of the podcast this week as well. But we will get right to it, and we will talk about the Gunter Tigers and what they were able to do in the 3A Division II state semifinals and their 47-12 victory over Lubbock Roosevelt out in wonderful Abilene at Abilene Christian University. And this was a game that was close at halftime on the scoreboard, not so much on the field. And we will talk about all that as Gunter was able to pull away after leading 22-12 at halftime, and obviously was not in much trouble there in the second half as they scored 4 touchdowns and they held Roosevelt off the board to get that victory and move on to the championship game. So I know we talked on the podcast last week about what we were going to see in this matchup, and obviously the big question was the Gunter defense going to be able to hang with the flex bone that Lubbock Roosevelt likes to run. They average 50 points a game. They average almost 450 yards on the ground. They don't pass hardly at all, so you know what you're going to get. The question is, can you stop it? Can you be disciplined enough to stop it and keep them in check? And Gunter did more than that. They held that offense to 213 total yards. That came on 53 carries, which is not a very good yard per average attempt. There were 3 passes actually attempted by Roosevelt. None of them were complete, and one was actually intercepted by Ethan Sloan. And it was a pretty dominating performance for the most part. We'll talk about the other touchdown that came for Roosevelt on defense. But like we said, there was only 1 touchdown scored by the Eagle offense, and the line offense. And so no, they're Eagles. Yeah, they're the Eagles. And that came on a 4th down play inside the red zone when it was pretty obvious that Roosevelt was going to go for it. So if they were to get that stop, then they potentially could have pitched a shutout against that offense. And it was one of those deals where like I talked about with Coach Frizzell leading up to the game. I think we kind of were going to know the first 3 or 4 drives how Gunter was going to be able to handle it. Obviously, they handled it very well. Initially, early on, it looked like the option pitch, the pitch man was going to potentially be a problem. And then once Gunter got the hang of what they were trying to do on the outside, there was really nowhere for Lubbock Roosevelt to run. They didn't have any super long plays. This type of an offense is all about misdirection and getting people in the wrong gaps and overrunning plays, and then you can't make a tackle and a guy breaks loose. They have. I think I don't know if we talked about it on the podcast, but especially in the preview, the yards per carry that these guys were averaging. I mean, they had one guy averaging 20 yards a carry, and it was not like, oh, he has like 6 carries and he's averaging 20 yards a carry. A lot of their guys were averaging, at least 9 yards a carry. And to do that, you have to have big runs mixed in there, and they were not able to do that. There was nothing. I think the longest run they had was 14 or 15 yards. There was no super long 80-yard broken play type of a thing or anything like that. And I think that you could kind of tell that there was some frustration there as the game wore on, because obviously it had been so long since they had been stopped. Well, basically the first game of the season, that a team had been able to sort of shut them down, and you could tell that what they normally would run was not working, and that's a credit obviously to the defensive staff and to the guys on defense. Everybody stuck with their assignments and did what they were supposed to do, and of course the Gunter offense. You hate to say they did what they do. They put up over 400 yards of offense. The big game was by Ethan Sloan. He had 4 touchdowns, 3 carries, three rushing touchdowns. Had 9 carries for 80 yards. But he also had a 76-yard kickoff return in the second quarter after Roosevelt had got within 7-6 early in the second quarter. He returns that one 76 yards, which ended up being a designed play, something that obviously Gunter saw on film, where he got the ball on the right side and went all the way across the field to the left and had a chute, a tunnel, however you want to refer to it as, and he was able to take it to the house. And that play came after the initial kickoff went out of bounds, and Gunter could have elected to take the 5 yards and get the ball right there after the penalty to move it up to the 30. And they said, no, we want to kick it again. I don't know if they saw something on that kick, or they thought that they would since they went one way, they actually went left they went to the right, to their right sideline, that maybe they would go away from that, seeing as how that's just the direction they went, and they called something there. So that was a huge play. Also in the game, Hudson Graham had 15 carries for 114 yards, was 5 of 8 passing for 110 yards, and had a touchdown pass to Cole Lemons. Ivy Hellman had a touchdown run, and Ashton Bennett also had a touchdown run. He finished with 9 carries for 47 yards. And it was a very typical Gunter game on offense. They kind of pulled back the reins a little bit because they got up 47-12, and there were still 9 minutes to left. They started subbing guys in and out at that point. So it could have been worse, and it could have been worse in the first half. And we'll talk just real quick about the one sequence that made you kind of go, ooh, that might be the game-changing scenario if Roosevelt was able to win this game. So Gunter is up 20-6. They're in, like I said, pretty much in control. Roosevelt's not having a whole lot of luck moving the ball, and Roosevelt's about to punt. They're near midfield on their side of the field, and the snapper goes to snap it, and the ball gets stuck. He went to snap it, and it went against the ground and just literally stuck by his ankle. And so instead of getting the snap back to the punter, the ball just was there, and Gunter ended up taking over at I think it was the 46-yard line for Roosevelt with about 1:12 left in the half. And so you've got a great chance to go up 27-6, and Gunter was getting the ball to start the second half. So that you had a real knockout, the double up potential there, get the score before half, then get the ball, score, and get 14 quick points. And so Gunter gets a first down. I think they got a second first down. They definitely got one first down. And now we're under a minute. Now we're under 40 seconds. Gunter's borderline. About the 25-ish yard line, somewhere in that neighborhood. And they try to run a play where Graham takes the snap and he turns and he just kind of stops to kind of make them think he doesn't have the ball. And unfortunately, he ended up getting hit while he was trying to pitch the ball to Sloan coming from left to right, if you're picturing it. And unfortunately, because he was getting hit, he could not complete the full motion of the pitch, and the ball just kind of died. And J.J. Diaz recovered that for Roosevelt. And not only did he recover it, he returned it for a touchdown, 66 yards, with 23 seconds left in the half. So that's how it was 20-12. And you're thinking, well, at bare minimum, Gunter goes in up 20-6. You've got a 2-touchdown lead, and then all of a sudden it's 20-12, and perhaps Roosevelt has some life. But they did next to nothing in the second half. Obviously, they were forced to go for it on a couple possessions. Adam Reed came up with some big tackles on those fourth downs, trying to get the edge on those options. So they turned it over twice on downs. Sloan had the interception as they were trying to catch them off guard with one of those rare passes. And so it just things did not go at all like what Roosevelt thought it was going to go for a team that's having the best season in school history, trying to get to the championship, obviously for the first time, having won more games than ever before. And so they were able to hang around, but they just couldn't carry that momentum over. And of course, Gunter, we've talked about, they've had some, this is the second time in the playoffs that they've had, a semi-close game at halftime. And you can see, the no panic, and not just the no panic, but come right out and put things away in the third quarter. They scored 3 times in the third quarter to make it 40-12, and then that's it. That's your ball game right there. So Gunter advances to the state championship, which is on Thursday night, 7 p.m. At AT&T Stadium in Arlington, home of the Cowboys. And obviously that's a very familiar spot for the Tigers. This is the 4th time during the 6-year run that they are playing in the championship game. They, of course, have a win in 2016. They have a win in 2019, and they had a runner-up finish in 2017. So they're going to try for their 3rd championship. At worst, they're going to be the state runner-up. And of course, that's nothing to sneeze at. And the matchup is what all the prognostications said it would be. Gunter will take on Franklin, 15-0 versus 15-0. Both these teams were ranked. Franklin was number 1 all season in the state rankings. Gunter was number 2 all season in the state rankings. And so it's the matchup that everybody thought it was going to be, and I think it's the matchup that everybody wants to see. In the championship, I think everybody can agree these are probably the 2 best teams. To touch on Franklin a little bit, so this is Franklin's 3rd time in the championship game since 2015. They were there last year. They lost to Canadian in the final. So Canadian beat Gunter in the semifinals, then beat Franklin in the final, and the final came down to the very end. It was a 35-34 victory by Canadian, and what actually happened in the sequence of events was Franklin actually scored to go ahead with about 6 minutes left in the game, and they missed the extra point. So instead of being up 35-28, they were up 34-28. And then when Canadian scored a couple minutes later, they went up 35-34 because of that mixed extra point. And then when Franklin got the ball back, they were unable to get close enough to even attempt a field goal. They got to the Canadian 41-yard line, which obviously would have been about a 58-yard kick, which I don't know, how many kids across the state, let alone in 3A Division II, could even come close to making a kick like that. And they were unable to get a final pass off at the end. There was a sack to end the game, and that's how the game ended. So Franklin was 3 or 4 minutes away from winning their first state championship. they were a missed extra point from at least going into overtime, and then who knows. So you have a group of hungry kids. They did lose some key pieces, some key seniors, but there's a lot of kids that were key parts of that, and they obviously think this is their year. And of course on this side you have Gunter with kids that for them this could be this is obviously their second. A lot of them it's their second championship game. There are guys who are seniors that were key contributors as sophomores on the last title team, and a lot of those guys were back last year, and of course they had designs on repeating, and I'm sure the sophomore guys thought, hey, we'll do this all 3 years because we think we're that good. Obviously they've been good enough to get to the Final Four. Last year losing the semifinals and of course making the championship game this year, and I think this is going to be a really good game. Franklin advanced with a 28-14 win against Wascom, and that was a game that was a lot closer than people thought. That game was actually tied at 14 going to the fourth quarter before Franklin was able to pull out that game with a couple of touchdowns there in the final quarter. So this was not some sort of everybody saw it coming. Wascom gave it their best to try to keep the 1 versus 2 matchup that everybody wanted to see from happening. But Franklin was able to make the plays in the second half and get that done as well. The thing that of course is interesting, besides the fact that both these teams have sort of been there, done that. So this is not a matchup of potentially like with Roosevelt. If Roosevelt had won, you have a team that was there last year and a team that's never been there. And oh my God, we're at Cowboys Stadium. This is amazing. We're playing for a state championship, and how are we going to handle that? The interesting thing about this matchup is Franklin runs the slot T, which of course is interesting because when you look at Gunter's district, there is a team that is left that runs the slot T in Bells, and so Gunter's used to what that offense brings as opposed to what they saw this week, trying to get ready for the flex bone, which has guys obviously in different formations and different you have to handle it differently. So that's obviously an interesting twist of with that because it's something that Gunter's familiar with, and they don't have to worry about spending the whole week about trying to go up against something that they haven't dealt with. They've got some base to go off of, and just to be able to deal with the wrinkles of that Franklin does. And of course, what would have been interesting was Wascom actually runs the flex bone, so that would have been an interesting wrinkle going into the championship if Wascom had somehow won, because you're coming off a game against a team playing it for the first time, doing it as well as you did. Now you've got some familiarity with it. Wascom would have had to have been like, we run this offense to try to get people from not seeing it, and what are the odds that the team we're going to play for the championship just played a team with the flex bone, so they would have had some familiarity there. So I honestly think this is going to be a really good game. The 3 times Gunter has played in the championship game, the games have not been close. Both of Gunter's wins were blowouts, and the game that they lost against Newton was close for a while, and then Newton had some huge plays, some big touchdown, some long touchdown plays, and they turned a close game into a 40-16 final. My initial read, and I still have to do some research and do some stuff getting ready to preview this game in the paper. I think this is going to be a really good game. I think if you're looking for keys, and I like to think I'm pretty good at predicting things, and I like to think I always like to go back and look and see when I do the players to watch. I always feel good when I end up sort of picking somebody. It's not just sort of random. I do like to try to pick people I think are going to make a difference in that week's game. I think looking at this matchup, the big thing is going to be Gunter's passing game. And the reason I say that is because much like last week with Roosevelt, I think Franklin will occasionally pass if they have to. I don't think they don't want to not pass. But I think you have one side that definitely leans towards we're going to run all the time. And people who have watched Bells know, if you throw more than 2 or 3 times, it's probably because something bad is happening. It's not part of the regular offense. Whereas what Gunter has and all the athletes that they have, whether you split out Ethan Sloan, you have a big target in Cole Lemons, you have guys in Ivy Hellman and Ken Lemberg. They can all make plays in the passing game. And so if things, for whatever reason, aren't particularly working with Gunter's running game, which has not been an issue at all, but if you run into a defense where they might be able to take that away, I think I would feel much more comfortable if I'm Gunter's passing game as opposed to if Franklin tries to do anything passing, or if they even think about it. I don't know if that's going to happen. So the yardage difference on the ground may be pretty similar. I think the chance that Gunter has to rack up some big plays in the passing game and have even if it's like only 150 yards, the yardage difference could be like 150 to like 30, something along those lines, and that could be a huge advantage in this game. And then ultimately, I think you hate to say it because it's very cliche, but I think it's going to come down to turnovers as well. This is a game where there's going to be, you assume, a lot of running. So the chance to get turnovers is going to come on fumbles. So ball security is I think obviously is huge. And potentially stuff on special teams. Last week, Gunter was able to recover it wasn't even a muffed punt because the guy didn't touch it, but a semi-deep kick inside the 20-yard line that bounces around and Gunter runs down. Dakota Lowry is the guy who recovers it because it bounces and the guy thinks it's going to go out of bounds, so he lets it bounce and then it bounces back upfield. If a punt bounces off of somebody, if you're able to get a punt block, something like that is it doesn't count as a turnover, but it is a huge play that leads to a change of possession. Because it doesn't count as a fumble or anything like that. Because obviously the ball is not going to be in the air, I don't think, a whole lot. So interceptions are going to be hard to come by, and so the question is going to be, can guys swarm the ball on both sides? Can guys swarm the ball, rip the ball out, make a play there to end a drive? Because I feel like both teams, have the athletes to make plays, keep drives going, that sort of thing. So I'm expecting this to be a really good game. I think if anybody cares about the sort of thing about you can't, I don't know if you want to look at records, you can look at records, that sort of thing. There are no common opponents. There's nothing like that we can look at. But they are both undefeated, so they're really good. There's only 3 other undefeated versus undefeated matchups. So I think this is obviously one of the matchups, at least for 4A and under. I think people are looking at as the big one before we get into the weekend with some of the bigger programs, some of the storylines that are happening there, and of course, it's going to be a big story either way because Franklin's going to win their first title, or Gunter's going to add their third in 6 years as part of this amazing run. And like I said, either way, Gunter's going to have a 6-year run with 3 titles, a runner-up, and 2 state semifinal appearances, or 2 titles, 2 runners-ups, and 2 semifinal appearances. And and they're either going to be 16-0 or 15-1, and it just adds to this run that got started back in 2016. And either way, whatever we talk about next week and looking to the future, it's still going to be bright no matter what happens. But it will be interesting to see if Gunter's able to add some more hardware when they take on Franklin at 7 o'clock on Thursday at AT&T Stadium. And for those looking to get tickets, obviously you have to pay for the whole day. So if you're looking at the price, if you can go for the whole day, I suggest that. As someone who was able to do the doubleheader, the Pottsboro Gunter doubleheader a couple years ago, which was really fun, and I know a lot of people around here went to go watch both of those games because that was, how could you not? But even though Gunter's the only local tie, if you can take the day, I know we're at that time of the year where maybe you could slip away for the day because it's late in the year and holidays are coming and maybe there's not a lot going on around the office or I'm not advocating skipping school, but it is an option. I know obviously a lot of Gunter people there. That's gonna be a really fun day. I mean, you have a game at 11 in the 2A Division II game between Falls City and Stratford, and then the 3A Division I game. Obviously, Whitesboro fans are having somewhat of an interest to see if Brock ends up going all the way. They take on Lorena in that matchup before the Gunter Franklin game at 7. So that whole day is going to be really fun. And honestly, any day, if you go on Wednesday and you see the 6-man games, I know that's kind of weird because we don't really have a whole lot of 6-man action in this neck of the woods, especially at the UIL level. But I also think the Shiner Hawley game's got a chance to be really good, the 2A Division I game that night. And then, of course, Friday with the 2 4A games and the 5A Division I game. And then on Saturday, of course, with the really big dogs in 6A. I think all 3 of the games on Saturday are just super interesting. You got powerhouses all over the place. It's going to be, I think this week is going to be really exciting in a lot of ways. And we'll see if Gunter can bring home another championship. So if you do go out there, be safe. Great seats are available. You can sit wherever you'd like. And so we'll see what happens on Thursday night for the state championship. So we'll be guaranteed to have at least one more of these. We'll do a wrap up. We'll kind of look at everything. Maybe kind of just touch on the 2022 season ahead. But right now I'm gonna jump into some of the realignment talk maybe here for about 15-20 minutes. Just based on what we got late last week with the announcement of the UIL cutoffs. So for those just real quick who don't know how the process works, in late October, everybody submits their enrollment at that point of the school year to the UIL, and then the UIL takes all those numbers, puts them essentially from the biggest school all the way to the smallest school, and then they figure out, okay, here's where the cutoff is for 6A teams, and here's where and everybody did below that, and then we go to 5A to 4A to so they go through and they kind of pick out the 200 and whatever, something, it changes from year to year. These are the 240 teams in 6A, and then the next 240 teams are in 5A, and then the next 190 teams are in 4A, and then so on all the way down. It's a little more complicated than that because sometimes people opt up, and the classification number, the enrollment numbers, there's like half people and quarter. So I that's as simple as I can give it to you, and that's pretty much all you need to know. And so the first process is they get all the numbers in late October, and then usually the first week of December, which is what just happened. We got the cutoff numbers, and what that means is we know what enrollment is in 6A. In this case, if you have an enrollment of 2,225 or more, you are in 6A. And so that means 5A, if you have a number of the 2,224 and below, the question is, what is your floor in 5A? So the 5A cutoff was 1,300 to 2,224. So if you're in that range, you're 5A. If you're in 4A, you have an enrollment of 545 to 1,299. If you're in 3A, you have an enrollment of 250 to 544. If you're in 2A, you have an enrollment of 105 kids to 249, and then anything below 105 is 1A. So that's just to see who's in, any of those groups based on the numbers that were sent in. And then for 5A, 4A, 3A, 2A, and 1A, they split those in half for football. And so we'll get to that here in a second. So the big question, obviously, initially is, are people going to change classifications? Do we have people going from 5A to 6A or 6A to 5A? Do we have people going from 3A to 2A? Do we have people going from 3A to 4A? Who's going in what direction? And this is a big deal because the final process that's going to come out in February is who is in your district for the next 2 years. And so if somebody leaves, does somebody come in as a replacement? Does that totally change? Do they completely redo a district? How many districts get affected because this team went here, this team went there, that sort of thing. And so for us, there was only one team or one school that we really were looking at to see if they would be changing classifications. And that was Whitesboro. Whitesboro turned in 239 kids, which ends up falling in the 2A classification. It's 105 to 249, and they turned in 239. So Whitesboro, which is currently competing as a 3A program, is going to go down to 2A for at least the next 2 years. They were the only ones that were close. I know there were some people, and I guess technically Sherman and Denison were close in the grand scheme of things, but they were not somebody that, if it did happen, it was going to be somewhat surprising. And the reason for that is, for Sherman, the numbers always go up. Essentially, they almost never go down. Even if it's a small number, they always go up. So last time the number to go up to 6A was 2,220. Well, it only went up 5 kids. So Sherman turned in a number of 2,185, which is relatively close in the grand scheme of things, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be the number doesn't go backwards. So Sherman was 40 kids away, and that sounds like it's close, but it's really not, because they had a number that was under the last number, and the number usually doesn't backtrack. So that is a number, however, being as close as they are for the 2024 realignment. Obviously, there's a really good chance that Sherman goes 6A in 2 years, just based on the current growth, the number of kids that they've added the last 2 years, the number only going up 5. There's a really good chance that when school opens next year, even though that doesn't count towards the number, the 2020 when school starts in 2022, Sherman might be over that number, that 2 to 5 number. So then we may get into a situation with Sherman in 2 years where what did they turn in, and then what does the number come up? Now, Denison was actually closer to the 4A, 5A cutoff than Sherman was to the 5A, 6A cutoff. Denison turned in 1,327 and a half. Yes, they had a half, and the number was 1,300. Now, it was going to take a huge jump for that number to come up past Denison. Like, there was going to have to be a massive jump for Denison to fall under. I put it at like a 5% chance. I didn't think it was going to happen. The number last time was 1,210. So to get to Denison, that number had to go up by 120 kids, which is a monster jump. Now, it did go up 90, so it was pretty close. So there is that. And that's a number for Denison next time in 2 years. We're going to have to see if Denison falls to 4A, because I think that's a very viable option at that point. A lot of the growth that we are seeing, and Sherman is part of that growth because of they added over 300 kids, or about 300 kids from the last enrollment process. Denison kind of stays there, and a lot of these schools are jumping them. A lot of these new schools that are opening with more kids than them. So by the time this next realignment comes around, we may be talking about Denison looking at being a 4A, just based on the fact that, and it's a number that hasn't really changed since I've been here. Denison sits in that 13 that low to mid 1300s. It just hasn't really changed a whole heck of a lot. And so people just keep jumping them. And as an example, I can use Melissa. Melissa is, and they probably, and honestly now they might even have more kids. They're within a dozen. They're within a dozen kids of Denison. And Melissa 10 years ago had like 250 kids. And now they're up over 1,300. A school like Argyle has more kids than Denison now. Lovejoy, which had always been, a small 5A, they jumped over Denison. So there's a lot of schools that are jumping over Denison, and that has become and they just kind of stay very stagnant. They had in 2017 they turned in 1312. Then 2 years ago they turned in 1348, and then this year they turned in 1327. It's always in that between 1300 and 1350-ish range. And when you look at a lot of other people, if you go back a couple cycles for just about everybody, they're adding, especially at that big of a level. Sherman went from 1878 to 1951 and a half to 2185. So there's Denison just kind of sits in that zone, and everybody just kind of leapfrogs them. So that was the only real consideration in terms of the outside chance that Sherman and Denison might move, but we didn't think that was a realistic thing. Whitewright's the only one that's going to move. They're going to go from 3A to 2A. So what that means is, obviously, for the other sports, that current district that they're in with, which kind of stinks because it's a good almost pretty local district. With Howe, Gunter, Pottsboro, them, Leonard. It's very local. Bells is in that district. I think it's a really good district to cover. It's very competitive. And so obviously that's an issue. It also affects, obviously, with the football, because now instead of being a 3A Division II team, they're going to go into 2A and be a 2A Division I team. And so I bring up the cutoffs for football. There were a couple of teams that we were interested in watching here. Obviously, we knew White-Wright was going to 2A Division 1. So there's that. As part of a corresponding move with White-Wright, one of the teams down there we were looking at was Collinsville. Collinsville turned in 157 students. They literally had one kid from being a 2A Division 2 team last time. Literally the number that they turned in was the bottom number of 2A Division 1. I think it was 164 exactly, or 163. And then they lost a couple kids. They're down to 157. So they're going to drop down to 2A Division 2. What that does, that might actually make things pretty easy. White-Wright could just slide into Collinsville's slot into a district that has Tom Bean, Tioga, Trenton, some of those teams. Part of the problem with that old district is Lindsay is also dropping down with Collinsville. So the district that you might be looking at would be Alvord, White-Wright, Tom Bean, and Trenton is only a 4. So you would probably have to find a 5th team to jump in there just to kind of keep it from being one of those every team makes the playoffs type of deal. But I think that's the core of a potential district there. So that works out well. But now we go to 8-3A Division 2, which is, of course, that district that White-Wright was in with Gunter, Bells, Leonard, Lone Oak, Blue Ridge, S&S. That was an even number of teams. You had it was an 8-team district. So everybody would play. Now you take White-Wright out, and now we have to find a replacement. Well, one of the other teams we were looking at, the Howe Bulldogs, they turned in an enrollment that got them to drop down from 3A Division 1 to 3A Division 2. So that was another situation, much like Collinsville, that Howe turned in 349. The last cutoff was 350. So the number would have to go backwards, which it almost never does, but it could. So if you're Howe, you had to sweat just a little bit just to make sure, because you were literally right below the number. And the number went from 350 to 360. So as soon as that came out, Howe knew that they were going to drop down to Division 2. Well, with White-Wright dropping out of 8-3A Division 2, Howe could slide right into that district and take White-Wright's spot, and then the rest of the district could stay the same. And so that's something obviously we're going to watch for to see if it is as simple as that, or if there's a little bit more maneuvering that has to be able to be done. Because the one thing people forget, and I will remind you here, just because that looks like that works here, the domino effect from across the state as they try to go from District 1 to District 16, and for the other sports, District 1 to District 32, sometimes it doesn't work out. We've had Gunter and S&S go to the west. We had Bells, and some of the people in this district in Region 3 last time I guess 2 realignments ago because it just the flow didn't work out. But this could be a perfect swap all the way around. Howe comes down to 3A Division 2, takes White-Wright's spot, and then White-Wright takes Collinsville's spot as Collinsville moves down to 2A Division 2 from 2A Division 1. The other team that we were looking at to see how the cutoff would affect them was Gunter. From a football standpoint, obviously they're a solid 3A team, much like 3A program, much like Howe is. They turned in a number of 354. Well, the old number was 350. So again, Gunter having to sweat it out just a little bit, because if the number stayed the same, Gunter was going to move up to 3A Division 1. And they could have slid right into Howe's spot. However, the number, like we just mentioned, went from 350 to 360, so Gunter stays down in 3A Division 2, which I know a lot of people in Region 2 are not happy, because they will be, at minimum, the 6-time defending region champions. They may be the defending state champions, but they're obviously going to be favored to win the region again. So I think a lot of people were hoping, man, can they just turn in enough kids to maybe go to Division I? So that didn't happen. So Gunter stays down. So we learned that as well. So that's not a big surprise waiting on realignment day, which a couple of cycles ago we would be sitting there waiting on realignment day going, is Gunter going to be a big 3A or small 3A, and how does that change things and all that sort of stuff. So that's the reason they do the cutoffs now. So we know Gunter's going to be 3A Division II at least for 2 more years. If their growth continues the way it has the last couple of years, I'll try to pull it up here. So Gunter went from 323 to 354, and even from 2017, back then it was 296. So in the last 4 years, Gunter's added about 60 kids. And just from 2 years ago, they've added 21. If they were to add another 21 and get to about 375, they will be sweating out the number, because this time the number only went from 350 to 360. If it only goes from 360 to 370, then Gunter would go up the next time. So that's going to be interesting. And then just to touch on with Howe leaving, obviously they're in a district with Pottsboro, and a lot of those eastern teams that it's been the last couple of years: Whitesboro, Mineola, Mount Vernon, Bonham, Commerce, Rains, those guys. Everybody else ends up staying in 3A Division I. So there's a chance maybe they just drop Howe and it stays a 7-team district instead of an 8-team district, which is bad just from the standpoint of somebody has to have a bye every week. I don't think it's going to happen, and it probably could have happened if Brock had actually moved up to Division I, had moved up to 4A, but they missed by like 10 or 15 kids. Whitesboro, who obviously is going to get a lot of attention out in Region 1 off of having the best run in school history that they had, that district has a chance to stay intact for 3A Division I because Brock didn't leave, and there was a lot of thought that Brock was going to move up to 4A, and then that would have been a 7-team district, and then potentially Whitesboro could have come back into Region 2 and slide into that spot. I don't think they'll do that because the travel is just as bad, if not worse, for Whitesboro to go east instead of going to the west like they have been. And I think there's a pretty good chance that district stays the same. But it is something to potentially, if it does happen, don't say I didn't warn you, that they move Whitesboro back this way. I don't think they will because obviously they're right near Pilot Point and Ponder. As they kind of go that way, they kind of flow that way to the west. So I think there's a decent chance that that district stays the same. And honestly, without having looked at all the numbers and teams, I do think that the 5-3A where Pottsboro is, they could just drop Howe out and into Division II, and then just say, hey, you 7 guys get to hang out together for 2 years, and we'll see how it goes. So that's what we gleaned from the cutoffs. Just to recap real quick, Whitewright goes from 3A to 2A as an overall drop. And then for football, Howe is going from 3A Division I to 3A Division II. Collinsville is going from 2A Division I to 2A Division II. And Gunter just missed going up to 3A Division I. And I guess we could say Sherman and Denison ended up barely missing, going to 6A and 4A, at least in terms of depending on how close you viewed those cutoff numbers as being. I didn't think they were rather close, but some people might disagree, and that's certainly their right. But we'll have plenty to talk about as the projections and stuff get readjusted based on these numbers going forward once the football season ends. And that'll be around the corner before you know it, the first week of February. I think it's February 3rd is when those come out, and then of course I'll do a little preview for that as well, and then we will have I'll do a podcast, a reaction podcast, just based on what things look like. Just to give you a taste of some of that, for instance, like Sherman's football district, Highland Park is leaving. They're going to 6A. Wiley East is going to 6A. So there's 2 spots there with Sherman's district. I think Sherman's going to be in, I think, almost a completely different district, to be quite honest. I have no idea what's going to happen with Denison. Denison's football district, Prosper Rock Hill is going all the way to 6A. They're skipping over 5A Division I and going to 6A completely. And then based on the Frisco's Lebanon Trail, Frisco Liberty, and Frisco are all going to Division I. So that means out of the 8 opponents that Denison has in football, 4 of them are gone next year. So we'll have to see how that's going to work. And then for the other sports, volleyball, basketball, baseball, softball, the current 10-5A is going to be gone because obviously Wiley East and Rock Hill are both in that. And that's an 8-team district. And you're going to have to lose those 2 teams because they're going to 6A. I would assume Melissa is going to take one of those spots. I would imagine in Denison's potential football district, Melissa might be one of the teams that they dump in there as well. Argyle could end up being an option. So Denison this time around could really end up being in a. I fear they're going to go west. Go with some Wichita Falls people. Have some really long road trips. I don't think they're going to go east, just based off of what I've seen projection wise. So I think both Sherman and Denison are going to be really interested to see what happens with their football districts for sure, because the cutoffs have really taken away some of their options going forward. So, but that's obviously for down the road. We've got a state championship game to worry about, and so when we talk again, we'll be recapping to see how Gunter does. But I wanted to give everybody a taste of some realignment talk because the cutoffs did come out, and we'll get a little bit more into depth on that next year. And we will talk about the result of the 3A Division II championship game next week on the podcast. That will be the last one before the holidays. And so, as always, I thank you for tuning in, and we will talk to you next week.